Even for the hardened New York police officers who are used to dealing with the most brazen criminals, there are sometimes cases that go beyond the ordinary. Two experienced detectives who have dedicated over 2 decades to fighting crime encountered such an incredibly insidious crime that they had never seen before in their entire careers. This case was striking in its ingenuity and had no analogues in their practice. It all began on September 2, 2016, when an emergency call came in from a victim. 35-year-old Olga Tsvyk, a Ukrainian immigrant who worked as a beautician in a beauty salon, reported the theft of valuables from her apartment. Arriving at the crime scene, the patrol officers found the woman in poor condition. She was suffering from severe dizziness, nausea, and periodically losing consciousness. Olga said that shortly before the incident, she had gone to the hospital, but even after returning home, she still felt unwell. After listening to the victim's story about the circumstances of the event, the police carefully questioned her about her latest suspicious contacts. Olga recalled a client named Victoria Nasirova who had come to her home that day and persistently demanded an urgent eyelash extension. This woman had previously visited the beauty salon where Olga worked and always behaved defiantly, as if they were close friends. Victoria constantly imposed herself, but on the day of the crime, she was especially persistent. Olga refused Victoria, explaining that she only provides such services in the salon and does not accept clients at home at all. However, Victoria did not back down, and eventually, Olga had to reluctantly agree to accept her at her place some time later. The victim also recalled that she had recently declined Victoria's invitation to hang out together. Another interesting detail was the external resemblance between Olga and Victoria, which always surprised the beauty salon master. As it turned out during the interrogation, Victoria came to Olga's apartment with 3 pieces of cheesecake from a popular local bakery. She ate 2 of them with relish and insisted that Olga try the third. Shortly after this treat, when Victoria had already left, Olga felt ill, she was nauseous, and then she lost consciousness for about half an hour. Coming to her senses, Olga called an ambulance and was hospitalized, but blood tests did not reveal any foreign substances. Returning home, the woman noticed the disappearance of several valuable items and contacted the police. Initially, law enforcement officers were skeptical of Olga's story, assuming that she was under the influence of drugs and it was all her imagination. The victim's strange behavior, slowness, and poor general condition led detectives to believe that the story about the look-alike woman was a figment of her imagination. However, Olga firmly denied using any prohibited substances and insisted that the cause of her condition was the piece of cheesecake that Victoria had treated her to. The police examined the scene and found a bakery box in the trash, which the victim recognized. The dessert remains were sent for examination to check if it had become a source of poisoning. However, the test results did not reveal anything suspicious in the cheesecake. Olga continued to claim that the cause of her ailment lay precisely in it, referring to her visit to the hospital and the futile attempts of doctors to find traces of poison in her body. When the police tried to obtain more detailed information from the hospital about the patient's condition and the examinations performed, the medics refused to provide it, citing confidentiality. For law enforcement, this became another reason not to trust the victim's words. In addition, they failed to find the client Victoria mentioned by Olga. So the investigation reached a dead end until new circumstances emerged. The next day, a neighbor noticed a suspicious woman near Olga's apartment who went in and out several times, hanging around, until she came face to face with the witness. The stranger reported that her friend Olga was ill and quickly left. The worried neighbor looked into Olga's dwelling, the door of which turned out to be unlocked. The apartment was unbearably stuffy, the heater was running at full capacity, despite the summer 30-degree heat. Olga was lying on the bed unconscious, wearing a strange combination of clothes, revealing underwear and warm sweatpants. Hearing about this, the detectives suspected that someone had deliberately tried to change the victim's clothes. Scattered pills of potent drugs were lying on the floor, as if Olga wanted to take her own life. The neighbor immediately called 911 and described the suspicious person to the police as an attractive-looking swarthy woman, very similar to Olga herself. These new details convinced the investigators that the look-alike did exist, and they intensified the investigation. The picture in Olga's apartment resembled an attempt to disguise a crime as a suicide, and the detectives assumed that the persistent client with the cheesecake, Viktoria Nasirova, was involved. The police began to search for the suspect but had no leads about her, not even a photograph. Later, a private detective, a former police officer who had been tracking the activities of the brazen swindler for a long time, turned to the department. He had tracked her traces on the internet, where she advertised escort services on dating sites and social networks. In his opinion, the woman used online activity to search for new victims. The scheme worked flawlessly. Viktoria's modus operandi was honed to the smallest detail. She would visit the next client, whom she found via the internet, and treat them to food or drinks containing potent psychoactive substances. When the victim lost consciousness, Viktoria would take all the valuables she found in the dwelling and disappear without a trace. This brazen method of robbery could have gone on indefinitely if not for a fatal coincidence. While law enforcement was investigating the case, Olga Tsvyk was gradually recovering from the shock she had experienced. After being discharged from the hospital, she shared the story of her poisoning on social media. The post caught the attention of one of the beauty salon's clients, who recognized in the description of Viktoria an acquaintance of her friend, Ruben Borakov. As it turned out, Ruben, the owner of a small dry cleaner, had fallen victim to Nasirova a few months before the incident with Olga. He had met Viktoria on a dating site for immigrants from the former Soviet Union countries and soon received an invitation from her for dinner. The woman boasted about her culinary talents, so Ruben agreed to come over. But as soon as he tasted the dish prepared by the hostess, he passed out. Coming to his senses, the man realized that he had become a victim of a powerful psychotropic drug that had nearly taken his life. Viktoria had cleaned out Ruben's pockets, taking money, credit cards, and an expensive watch. And when he began to regain consciousness, she brought him to the dry cleaners, handed him over to his colleagues, lying that the owner had drunk too much, and disappeared. Only later did Ruben realize that he had been robbed. The private detective who took on Viktoria's case suggested that in fact, Ruben and Olga were incredibly lucky to survive the encounter with the perpetrator. In 2017, he was approached by Nadia Fort, a young woman who lived in New York but was born and raised in Krasnodar. Nadia was searching for her missing mother, Alla Alekseenko, and suspected that Nasirova was involved in her disappearance. Alla had single-handedly raised two children, Nadia and her brother, so life was not easy. To secure a decent future for her children, the woman had to work several jobs at once. Nadia had dreamed of moving to America since childhood, and in 2007 her wish came true. The girl entered an American university. While in the USA, she met her first love and got married, taking her husband's last name, Fort. Unfortunately, the marriage turned out to be unhappy and ended in divorce. Despite personal problems, Nadia stayed in the States, found a good job, and regularly communicated with her mother, who had become a widow by that time. Alla, deciding to start a new life, sold the family house that had become too cramped for her and moved to a less spacious apartment. At the beginning of 2013, Alla had a new neighbor, Viktoria Nasirova. Despite a significant age difference, the women struck up a friendship. Viktoria learned from Alla that her daughter lived in the USA and became obsessed with the idea of meeting her. The mother arranged their meeting, and in September of the same year, Nasirova visited Nadia in New York. Nadia did not notice anything suspicious about her mother's friend. Viktoria seemed like a nice and pleasant person to her. Nasirova was interested in the possibilities of emigrating to the States, and Nadia willingly shared advice and her own experience with her. However, Viktoria's plan failed, and she returned to Russia, continuing to communicate closely with Alla. In the fall of 2014, Nasirova planned another trip to America and informed Alekseenko about it. Nasirova even offered to deliver a gift for Nadia if needed. Alla was delighted with such kindness and asked Victoria to deliver valuable items to her daughter, 2 mink coats and over $6,000 in cash. However, Nasirova kept postponing her visit to the USA, finding various reasons. This confused Alla, and she shared her concerns with her daughter in a phone conversation. Nadia reassured her mother and advised her to insist on the return of the valuables. On October 14, 2014, a miracle happened. Calling her daughter, Alla joyfully reported that Victoria had finally agreed to give back the items after long hesitation and persuasion. But this never happened. Soon after, Alla Alekseenko disappeared without a trace. All attempts to contact the mother were in vain. She stopped answering calls. Nadia and her brother became worried, because Alla had never disappeared without warning before. They were used to daily communication, and such a long absence of contact seemed extremely strange. Nadia called Nasirova and asked if she knew where Alla had gone. Victoria confirmed that she had seen Alekseenko the day before. They had allegedly had a nice chat over tea, after which the neighbor went about her business. Since then, according to Nasirova, she had not seen Alla, although she had heard that she was going to go somewhere. Nadia's brother rushed to visit his mother's apartment but found only emptiness there, neither Alla herself nor her belongings. The phone of the missing woman remained silent. And a few days later, Nadia and her brother received several mysterious text messages from an unknown number. The text seemed to be written by Alla. They said not to worry, that she was fine, happy, and there was no need to look for her. However, the style of correspondence did not at all resemble the mother's usual manner of communication, which only increased the children's concern. Nadia realized that something bad had happened to Alla. She took a ticket on the first available flight to Russia and arrived in Krasnodar to find out on the spot what had happened to her mother. The first thing the girl did was visit Alla's apartment and found it empty. Neither the owner herself nor the gifts for Nadia, which Victoria was supposed to deliver, were there. Without wasting time, the missing woman's daughter went to the police. Investigators began searching for Alla, and Nadia shared with them her suspicions about her mother's neighbor. The girl suggested that there might be a connection between the disappearance and the fact that Victoria had not returned the valuables. Perhaps Nasirova had a motive to get rid of Alla. Interested in the information provided by Nadia, the investigators developed an action plan. They suggested that the girl call Victoria and arrange a meeting. Nasirova agreed, and soon they met face to face. During the conversation, Nadia demanded to know where her mother was, to which Victoria reacted angrily. She started shouting that Alla was alive, but where exactly was unknown, and then ran away to her home. The police officers who were listening in on their conversation decided to visit Nasirova themselves. However, the suspect managed to convince them that she had nothing to do with Alla's disappearance, and all of Nadia's accusations were groundless speculation. In the absence of evidence, law enforcement could not take any action. Meanwhile, Nadia returned to her mother's apartment to take another close look at everything. The girl was surprised that despite Alla's absence for several days, the apartment was perfectly clean, not a speck of dust, as if someone had just done a thorough cleaning. But who could have done it if the owner had disappeared? In addition, Nadia noticed the disappearance of several valuable items, jewelry, and cash in the amount of $50,000. She immediately reported this to the police. However, the investigators, who had already spoken with Victoria, suggested that Alla could have simply taken the valuables with her on a trip and would return soon. But the daughter did not believe this version. She had a feeling that her mother was in trouble and that Nasirova was somehow involved. The girl contacted all of Alla's acquaintances and relatives, but no one knew where she could have gone. Nadia even printed out missing person flyers with her mother's photo and posted them all over the district. Relentlessly, the daughter searched for Alla on her own, driving around all the places where she liked to go. But all efforts were in vain. Nadia continued to correspond with Victoria, begging her to return her mother and promising a generous reward for it. However, the suspect denied everything. Despite the fruitless searches, Nadia did not lose hope of finding Alla alive. She regularly visited the police department to find out about the progress of the investigation, but there was no news. Then the girl hired a private detective. He managed to find out that on the day of Alla's disappearance, Nasirova had rented a car. Having studied the information about that car, the detective came across a surveillance camera recording from October 5, 2014. The video showed a car driving along a country road. There were two people in the cabin. Behind the wheel, probably, was Victoria, and in the front passenger seat was a motionless woman, very similar to 54-year-old Alla Alekseenko. Convinced that it was her mother on the recording, Nadia went to the police again. Investigators confirmed the fact of the car rental by Nasirova and summoned her for questioning. Victoria admitted that she was driving the rented car on the morning of October 5 but denied the presence of anyone else in the cabin. Trying to prove her innocence, the suspect agreed to take a polygraph test. After the testing, she was released pending the final results. When they came in, it became clear that Nasirova had failed the test and was now considered the main suspect in the case of Alla's disappearance. The police were going to arrest Victoria, but it turned out that she had fled, taking advantage of the fact that she had been released from the police department. The suspect left the country on the first available flight without informing law enforcement. Meanwhile, operatives intensified the search for the missing woman. Nadia stayed in Russia for another 6 months to personally join the investigation. She still hoped that her mother was alive and appealed to Interpol to assist in the search abroad. Having studied the route of the car rented by Victoria, the police ended up in a wooded area near Armavir, the suspect's hometown. It was there that they focused their further search. All of Nadia's hopes for her mother's safe return home were shattered to smithereens in April 2015, when investigators reported terrible news. In that forest, 3 hours' drive from Alla's house, charred human remains were found. Nadia identified Alla by her teeth, the rest of the body was mutilated by fire beyond recognition. Forensic experts were unable to establish the exact cause of death. After the formal identification, Interpol received an arrest warrant for Victoria Nasirova. However, the fugitive could not be detained immediately. After burying her mother in Krasnodar, Nadia returned to the States. For a long time, she could not recover from the loss and was unable to work. But eventually, the girl pulled herself together, promising her late mother to achieve justice and punish those responsible. Once, while surfing the internet, Nadia accidentally came across fresh photos of Victoria on social networks. The wanted woman was openly flaunting her luxurious life while in Mexico. The girl immediately informed the American police about this, and they launched their own investigation. It was then that Nadia hired one of the best private detectives in the USA, hoping to speed up the solving of the crime. The money for his services was allocated by the girl's wealthy friend, since Nadia herself had been out of work for several months due to depression after her mother's death. The detective carefully studied all the new pictures of Nasirova on social networks. In one of the selfies in dark glasses, he noticed the reflection of a car's dashboard. After going through hundreds, if not thousands of possible options, the man established that it was a Chrysler 300. In addition, the experienced sleuth was able to determine that the last photos of the fugitive were taken in the Russian-speaking area of Brooklyn, Sheepshead Bay. By starting to match local Chryslers by their license plates, law enforcement officers finally managed to track down the criminal. It was a real search for a needle in a haystack, but thanks to persistence and incredible efforts, the needle was found. Thanks to the detectives' persistent work, it was established that Victoria Nasirova lived with her new partner in a house located just 5 blocks from Nadia's home. The Chrysler, which the criminal used to get around, was registered in the name of her cohabitant. Victoria probably did not even suspect how close law enforcement had come. Being wanted internationally by Interpol, she carelessly posted her photos online, not suspecting that this could be a fatal mistake and lead to her exposure. The sleuth managed to track down Nasirova's boyfriend and contact him. The shocking truth was that the young man himself had become a victim of the insidious Victoria, who had fled after poisoning him. Moreover, the criminal did not spare even her chosen one's pet, a beagle that died from the poison. This circumstance caused even more public outrage, which closely followed the course of the investigation into Nasirova's crimes. Finally, on March 20, 2017, 41-year-old Victoria Nasirova was captured and arrested. Nadia, the private detective, and the police were able to breathe a sigh of relief. Leaving this dangerous person at large was too risky, as the number of her potential victims could grow every day. During a search of Nasirova's home, investigators came across a document that shed light on one of the most mysterious details of the case. In Victoria's hands was the identity card of Olga Tsvyk, the woman who miraculously survived the poisoning. It became clear why the criminal had chosen her as her target. Nasirova, whose visa was about to expire, desperately needed a passport with a photo of a person who looked like her. Such a document would allow her to avoid deportation to Russia, where justice awaited Victoria. Moreover, the investigation had reason to believe that the suspect planned to kill Olga in order to appropriate her identity. Only a lucky coincidence in the form of a vigilant neighbor prevented this insidious plan. The container with the remains of the ill-fated cheesecake was sent for re-examination. This time, having conducted a more thorough analysis with an expanded range of substances, phenobarbital was found in the pastry, a drug that Victoria gave to all her victims. Usually, it is a sedative, but in Nasirova's hands, it turned into a weapon. The swindler increased the dosage to lull people's vigilance. Olga was incredibly lucky to survive this treat. As it turned out, the hot temperature in her apartment was not at all accidental. It appears that under the influence of high temperature, the effect of phenobarbital is enhanced and can even lead to a lethal outcome. Victoria obviously knew about this peculiarity of the drug, which is why she turned on the heating at full capacity and tried to dress her victim more warmly. Fortunately, her plan fell through due to lack of time. Once in custody, Nasirova denied any involvement in any crimes, including the disappearance and murder of Alla Alekseenko, Nadia's mother, and the attempt on the life of Olga Tsvyk and other victims. The investigation also revealed other episodes of Victoria's criminal activity. Back in May 2016, she was a suspect in the theft of 2 fur products, but that case reached a dead end. Later, new details emerged. Nasirova was engaged in theft, meeting men via the internet, entering their homes, slipping intoxicating substances, and taking valuables. Most of her male victims preferred not to go to the police, fearing publicity and condemnation. This allowed the perpetrator to remain unpunished. Due to the pandemic and the need for thorough preparation of materials, court hearings in Nasirova's case were delayed for almost 6 years. Only in January 2023 did the case finally reach court, causing quite a stir among the media and the public. Victoria refused to testify during the trial, remaining silent throughout the proceedings. The judge forbade the jury to delve into the details of Alla Alekseenko's death, since this crime occurred outside the jurisdiction of American justice, in another country. Nasirova's lawyer insisted that the prosecution had no direct evidence that his client had personally poisoned the cheesecake and forced Olga Tsvyk to eat it. In her testimony, the victim only mentioned that Victoria had brought 3 pieces of dessert to her home and ate 2 of them herself. This prompted Olga to taste the 3rd piece without any suspicion. The defender posed a logical question: if the treat was poisoned, why did Nasirova herself not suffer? Instead, the prosecutors argued that this was not at all a random coincidence. According to their version, Victoria added phenobarbital to only 1 piece of cheesecake, knowing exactly which one. Therefore, she fearlessly ate 2 clean pieces, while the 3rd went to the unsuspecting victim. Thus, Nasirova managed to deceive Olga. After a lengthy review of all the circumstances of the case, the jury found Victoria Nasirova guilty of attempted murder in the second degree. Although the maximum punishment under this article provides for 25 years in prison, the judge somewhat softened the sentence, sentencing the defendant to 21 years behind bars. However, according to the law, Victoria will be able to apply for parole in 15 years. Nasirova began to feel the burden of her situation long before the verdict was announced, all 6 years while the pre-trial investigation lasted. There was no trace left of the once well-groomed and seductive woman. Her luxurious life had crumbled to pieces in an instant. The prison life turned out to be extremely difficult and joyless for Victoria, who complained about the terrible food and the lack of proper medical care. Being behind bars nearly cost Nasirova her life. During an attack by another inmate, the woman suffered severe injuries, as a result of which deep scars remained on her body, and her vision was at risk. Victoria tried to hold the leadership of the correctional institution accountable, accusing the guards of negligence and omission. In the end, this incident was settled out of court. The victim was paid $325,000 in compensation. Even while in prison, Nasirova did not admit her guilt. In an interview she gave to journalists right from behind bars, the woman denied any involvement in the murder of Alla Alekseenko and the poisoning of Olga Tsvyk. According to her, she only treated Olga to cheesecake but in no way forced her to do it, and she herself tasted that dessert without any consequences for her health. Another trial awaits Victoria ahead. After serving her sentence in the USA, she will be deported to Russia, where a new trial will begin, in the case of the murder of Alla Alekseenko. For Nadia, the deceased's daughter, this is at least some consolation, albeit small. Nasirova is behind bars and will no longer be able to escape the deserved punishment. Thank you for watching this story. Write your thoughts about it in the comments. Don't miss the future videos, subscribe and like the channel. Take care of yourself and people you love.